Hi, we're here at the Ethnic Studies podcast studio here at the University of California, Berkeley. Why don't we start off with some brief introductions and maybe a general overview of the podcast studio?
I'm Dr. Pablo Gonzalez. I direct the Ethnic Studies Changemaker project, which has now been open since August of 2021. But we've been working on the project for the last year and a half.
Hi, everyone. I'm Cecilia. I'm a work studies student and a sound engineer, and I've been working on the project since about 2 years ago. I started my sophomore year, so during the pandemic is when we started working on Zoom and podcasting.
Hi, everyone. My name is Angelica Garcia. I'm a second year here at Berkeley, and I work here at the podcast studio.
Great. I'll briefly introduce myself as well. I'm Karina Wu. I'm one of the interns in Bill Allison's CTO office.
And I'm Tara Kumar. I'm also one of the interns at Bill's CTO office. So I guess one of our first questions to you is, what does the podcast studio mean to you, Dr. Gonzalez, but then also on the end of students as well?
The studio, I think, represents several years of trying to fulfill a vision. It's something that I never saw myself doing about 2 years ago when I received the Changemaker Grant by the CTO here at the university. It's something that I didn't see, I have to admit, being completed over the last year, especially because of the pandemic. But I kept on having dreams about it, precisely the way you look at it. With the ability to offer opportunities for people to produce high quality podcasts and recordings that they could then pass out to the different community partners and networks that they have. If I have any kind of first memory is actually doing podcasts out of my office with many of my students in my classes, where I was offering podcasts as an assignment. And now that we have a studio, being able to be here with you all, and now being able to use all the equipment and have Cecilia and Angelica trained to produce and be sound engineers, I think is something, again, I never would have imagined. What do you think, Ceci?
Yeah, it's definitely been a lot different since when I started and when we were recording on Zoom. It's been amazing to be in this space with other students. I can definitely say that the podcast studio is a safe space for me as well as for a lot of my peers. It's just a really incredible experience, even being the sound engineer and behind the scenes. You get to experience each podcast with the students, which is a really incredible experience. And it's been great, working with all the different ethnic studies classes this semester and hearing about their incredible projects that they're working on.
For me, just like how Ceci said, it's definitely a safe space for me. I find myself, not only doing podcasts in here, but also homework and spending time with friends and with Dr. Gonzalez in here. So I genuinely love this space. I also get to listen to other podcasts of other students. So it's a learning process. I learn about topics that have never crossed my mind. And I definitely, I never thought I'd be recording podcasts in the first place. So I've seen myself grow in this space as well as learning new skills with technology that I never thought I would ever use.
Yeah, it's really great to hear about the growth of the studio, especially with navigating in the pandemic, though. What do you guys feel you were most proud in regards to the studio over the past year?
Yeah. When we first started this project with the help of Bill Allison and everyone at the Changemaker, at the CTO Changemaker Grant, it became such a difficult process and project to undergo. We had to first train, or I had to train the original 6 work studies that I had online over Zoom, and each one of them were in different places in California, and then be able to train them and have them facilitate workshops online with classrooms that were conducting podcast projects and also trainings. And at the same time envision at some point, we felt, a podcast studio, a physical podcast studio, not yet realized because of not being even to be on campus the first year. And so the podcast training that first year, I thought really gave us a sense of how to do things both remotely, but also how to troubleshoot, how to be able to not take things for granted, learn the very basics, teach folks and teach ourselves skills that we had really very little knowledge. I mean, YouTube was our friend, right? Because it's amazing, like trainings. We participated in some trainings right before we started the project. And so a lot of that work, I think, helped us do that. But then we also had this other aspect of the project, which was implementing augmented reality that, again, we couldn't necessarily do during the pandemic, but that we could start developing trainings for as well. And some of that actually ended up being a part of several classes that I was funded by the Art and Design Center here on campus that I was able to create an online journal that had augmented reality. And all of that, the students who trained and then gave workshops on that did unbelievable work, but almost impossible work, thinking about the circumstances over the last year and a half. So when we got back in person, everything shifted our focus to the studio and making sure that we had this physical space. So in part that was the transition, and it was, I think, a seamless transition, except for this desk that you see here, which in of itself was one of the most difficult things to assemble by ourselves as well. I think that no one will ever, I mean, we literally, the people in this room and some others, every screw, every nail, everything was assembled by us. And I think that shows the very nature of this place, that it was student initiated and student created.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I think one of the things you touched upon was the augmented reality aspect. So I guess one of the questions we have are, what are your thoughts surrounding the affordability of technology on campus and how it ranges for things like augmented reality in relation to the podcast studio?
Well, I'll answer, and then I know that Ceci and Angelica probably have something to say. I think a lot of this technology, first of all, I think podcasting, anyone can do. We train people to do it with their phones. We train people to do it with anything that they can could record their audio, even their computers. And you could still get really good quality that, just even we can train them to make sure in some of the processing that we do. And that's because the university had at that time, at least for the purposes of students, allocated money that the students paid into tuition, right, to have such things as the Adobe Creative Suite and other applications that they could learn from and use for such things as audio production and video production. I know that when that went up in the air last year, that really put us in a bind. But it only put us in a bind insofar as we had to pivot just in case we would not have it once we started in person. Having done already a year of teaching podcasting without a lot of the resources, we knew we could find a way, even if we didn't have the Adobe Suite. There are plenty of free editing softwares that we could have just learned how to use and so forth. But I still feel that this university doesn't necessarily have the resources that other universities have invested in. I've talked to so many other university teachers and not only faculty, but also administrators, having been a part of summer programs for Adobe and other places, where they're getting all of this and more for their students to create the most amazing multimedia projects. This university is behind tremendously on that. And I think having a space to think about such technologies that I think are not only the future, they're the present, like augmented reality. For ethnic studies in particular, it's about telling our stories. I mean, the whole point of this was to, as we say, scaffolding our stories, how to be able to make sure that our stories are present, but also how to be able to use the technology to tell those stories. And I think augmented reality is starting to appear as one of those places where we can use it to tell stories, but also to make particular statements about what's happening in the world today. And if we don't have access to the resources to create the applications for that, or to have students engage in those type of technologies, then we're missing so much across the board, not only in computer science or some of the other fields where you would see that, but even in the humanities and social sciences. So I think for me, we're still far behind. And we're hoping that this place, this particular first year is the first stage is to solidify ourselves as a campus podcasting location for people that want to do community work, that want to amplify their voices to so many different communities that oftentimes don't get those voices. But the next stage is to start incorporating those other technologies that we've been using, but I think we've been using them in such a way that I envision something much greater than that. I'm really looking forward to building the kind of connections with some of our more innovative units here on campus, like computer science, because we know we have so many amazing students that are already producing their own applications and programs that can then help in that, especially around educational software, which I think is something that is necessary in this campus. But go ahead, Ceci.
Yeah, I think that before working at the podcast studio, I was definitely not acquainted with podcasting. Even in high school, I went to a private Catholic school where they took great pride in the innovative technology that they used, but still there I was never introduced to podcasting, never had access to resources like this. And I think that working with different communities that have access to different resources has definitely shown me the power of podcasting. And like Pablo said, we started teaching on Zoom and teaching students how to film a podcast on their phone. And I think that was one of my first experiences, was recording this summer and even last spring on my phone. In terms of AR, I definitely agree that we need more support and more resources, because we use Artivive, which is great, but we're still limited because for Artivive you're only able to create 5 augmented realities, which is really limited. And so if we had an app or a different platform like that, it would definitely be really great, so that we could have unlimited access towards creating those projects.
Hold up. Ceci, why don't you tell them a little bit about this, the augmented reality curriculum that you created for other campuses?
Yeah, so last year, in collaboration with a bunch of different universities and professors across universities, I worked on a project, a part of digital library that I was introduced by Lorena Garcia, who works at USLDH, and alongside Sam Gutierrez and Saida, 2 past work studies here at the podcast studio, we worked on creating a curriculum for high school students and college students to implement ethnic studies and augmented reality into the classrooms. And 2 projects we worked on were the Decolonize Your Diet cookbook, and we also worked on another project on mapping out areas on campus and telling the story behind certain monuments and the history behind that.
So just as how Ceci had said previously about not having access to this type of technology in high school, I never thought of anything like this. I feel the closest thing that I ever heard to podcasting was probably the radio, and even just that, I thought it's pretty unobtainable. But then when I got here, I was able to see the technology and how to use it, and now I'm actually able to work with high schools near here in the Bay Area and helping them also create their own podcasts. So I definitely think that like the access to this type of technology is needed, because it is a platform. It's a new, it's a storytelling mechanism that is needed, and we need to get our stories out there. In terms of augmented reality, I personally haven't worked with that a lot, but I have seen like Ceci and other of the work study students here show me how it works. And I feel like if we were able to show this to not only students here on campus, but in high school and then out in the community, it would definitely open like an opportunity to tell our stories and show what we know and what we want to say out there.
I know you guys kind of mentioned not having access to these technologies prior to the podcast studio. Could you guys maybe talk about some of the larger issues, like large-scale issues on campus in terms of access to the technologies that we've seen that we have on campus?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, first of all, that students are already paying a tremendous amount in tuition and other services, and much of this I think the university has to offer for free. If it wants to compete as the number one university in the world, not just in the UCs, but in the world, then it has to think about how these services are precisely that, services that students here can utilize to create the next set of applications that will serve the greater good of the world. That's the question, and that should always be the deciding factor when allocating budget, especially in a campus that we know amongst many other campuses is strapped for money. And so I think the larger issue of this is about access. But the other thing is that increasingly the student population that is coming to the University of California, Berkeley, are coming from communities that don't have any of these access. They don't have access to a computer. They don't have access to laptops that can even hold some of these applications. Angelica will tell you better, but we have high school students that are using Google Chromebooks, and Google Chromebooks are good for high schools, but are not good for universities, especially if you're having to, for instance, have such important applications both in STEM, but also in particular like Adobe Creative Cloud, which takes so much memory, takes so much of the juice of a computer. And so all of these things I think are important because students are coming wanting to learn these tools, wanting to access them. Faculty, at least the ones that are really trying to think innovatively of their curriculum and their learning outcomes, are wanting to implement them, but they can't because of so many different things. So there's larger societal issues and issues on campus. The other thing is, this studio is for the students of the University of California, Berkeley, not only for ethnic studies students, but for the staff, students, communities, and faculty to use. There's very few places like this, and usually you would have to pay to use them. This is not a place for you to do. I mean, this is a place for you to come and be able to record your podcasts and be able to engage people and so forth. But we want this location here in the 5th floor of the Social Science Building to be a place of encounter where you can share your stories respectfully, and also to amplify those stories, not only across the university, but across the state and the country, if not the world. And so in order for you to do that, it's not only about knowing that this space is here, but to have other spaces like that, because we can't take the burden of all that. I mean, think about it. At the end of last semester, we had, coming to the end of the semester, we probably had every day 5 or 6 different groups coming in here recording for like 2 or 3 straight weeks. I mean, we're talking about 20, 30, 40 podcasts coming out of here. And that needs, first of all, a lot of resources, a lot of people power, and, the tremendous collective here of work studies. And we're able to accomplish that and facilitate in that. But how many spaces on campus exist like that? And so that needs all kinds of different resources, and needs funding, and needs, to be able to prioritize it, because this is for students. Yeah. So I think those are some of the larger issues that I see. But I also see that places, I can't say enough about the fact that the CTO believed in this project, knowing that there's few projects that were funded for that 1 year. And we try to make many of our constituents proud. And I'm hoping that the CTO and other stakeholders have seen what we can do, and we want to be able to do if we had more resources as well. Yeah.
I think that one of the issues on campus is the lack of awareness of resources that we have. Like, when I talk to students, like, not even half of them know that we have access to the Adobe Creative Cloud. And that just goes to show you that this university doesn't do a really good job at sharing those resources. Like when I think about my own experiences at this university, I wouldn't be where I am today without all of the accountability I've had to take for like seeking these resources. And that's something that we've like tried to work on a lot in this project, is like letting students know that this space is for them and it's for their communities, and that they have access to this space no matter what. And we try to like show that through our Instagram. Like we've been like posting a lot about all of our projects recently. And so I'd say like one of like the issues at the university is that like there's a lot of amazing resources, but we don't know about any of them.
I think personally in my experience as well, like I've struggled to find resources on campus. Even like when I tell people that like I work at this studio, they're like, there's a studio on campus. And I'm like, yes, it's 5th floor. Like definitely go check it out. And then it kind of trips them out when you tell them that it's open for everybody. And I feel like that's also something else, because when this university does share resources, it's very specific to specific populations. Like it's not for everyone. And I feel like these resources need to be open for everyone, just like how this studio is open for everyone to come regardless of your major or like field of study. So I do think that this university needs to prioritize like sharing this information and not just assuming that students know automatically just because they're on this campus.
Definitely, yeah. That's something I think Karina and I definitely have seen as students here as well. I guess kind of one of the things you guys have mentioned is this idea of being able to engage and amplify an audience through the podcasting studio. And so I guess one of the questions we have is, what kind of impact has the studio had, and how do you guys quantify or like measure that impact?
That's a great question. So I'm an anthropologist by training, so I never even think about quantifying anything. It's more quality than than about numbers. But you know, when we, it's a reflection more than anything. When we first were able to kind of forge and put together the studio, the physical studio, we sent out invitations to faculty in particular to incorporate it into their curriculum. And we even helped them. We would say we could address any concerns, especially around not knowing how to do podcasts. We said that we would be able to help them with any training, any office hours, even with curriculum building, so they can incorporate it into their curriculum. The thing is that at the university, unlike probably in the K through 12, change is really slow when it comes to curriculum. And so a lot of faculty, understandably, I think, are weary about changing what they know best, especially coming back from a pandemic. And so we had, I think, only several professors that took on the task, in particular in Asian American Studies, Harvey Dong and a couple others. Harvey, who's working, Dr. Dong, who runs also East Wind Bookstore here in Berkeley, was working on a tremendous project of oral histories in Chinatown and in other places around the Bay Area, especially around Asian diaspora narratives and oral histories. And while he had already implemented video oral histories, the podcast one I thought he felt could add a different element. And I think he definitely bought into it, and we were able to facilitate and help him with that. I had already been working with podcasts in all of my classrooms for the last 3 or 4 years, so it was something for me a little bit more natural. Where we've seen, I think, the most amount of use and application and even interest is in our campus and community partners. The underground scholars, for instance, we helped train over the last year while we were in shelter in place. And they've taken off in doing their own podcast. And they're right now completing a series of different podcasts around solitary confinement that I think is getting much attention. They can easily themselves record and edit their own podcasts. If you would have seen where we started, I mean, we started with learning literally how to turn on the mic, use the software step by step. And so you can measure that, I think, in a way of saying what needed to be learned, and then how to feel comfortable hearing your voice, right? So I think we've had, for instance, other groups that have used it. In particular, we offered grants last year to help ethnic studies students in particular start their own podcasts. And we see some of them take off. In particular, we've seen a couple of students have started, for instance, Latinas in STEM, a couple other ones that are still continuing their podcast even after leaving Berkeley. And so we've been trying to, in a sense, plant seeds first and then start developing a sense of what kind of impact. We hold a SoundCloud where most of the podcasts that have been produced, not only in my classrooms, but in other classrooms and other places, and they're continuing to pick up in terms of listenership. All of these things I think are important so that we can see the usage of the place in terms of the kind of work that or the kind of possibility of producing podcasts can have on this campus. I feel though that again our next steps are to solidify its place in the curriculum, especially here, not only in ethnic studies, but in ethnic studies based courses throughout the campus, to get more faculty investment in that. Because they're doing tremendous research, and podcasts would be a tremendous way for them to amplify their research to the communities that they're intended to reach. So I think there's a lot of that we're still working on, especially because, again, that involves having these conversations that in a place like this university, we have to come back to. We've gone 2 years basically not engaging each other. Podcasting could easily be a way for us to engage each other and to have conversations the way that this university should be, which is about building conversations. So I think that's one of the ways that we could do that. Other than that, besides having now well over 100 podcasts to our name, we haven't necessarily measured what that would mean, but I think you leave us with something as a task. And I appreciate that because I think it's necessary to make sure that to tell people the effectiveness of that. And sometimes you need those numbers, I guess.
Definitely. You guys also mentioned previously Zoom workshops, the AR curriculum. Are there any other ways, or what is the best ways you guys recommend that students can help get involved in the podcast studio and kind of just plant more of the seeds that you were talking about?
I think it depends on what students want to be involved in. For me personally, I'm more passionate about the augmented reality portion of it. So if students wanted to get involved, it would be incredible to have more students work with us in terms of creating that curriculum to share with the community. We also accept volunteers if some students would like to learn how to do sound engineering. We're always open towards that as well.
So if students want to come here into the studio, they could actually go to our website, which is ssbc.berkeley.edu. And so that website has not only access to our Calendly, where they can actually book appointments for the studio, but also there's all the tutorials are there, the YouTube videos for them if they want to do the podcast from home. They're all there. So that is definitely where they can see. They can also see the progress of the studio itself, even seeing how this room looked before, the way it looks now, and even right now. And also with the big give coming up tomorrow, there's definitely all the information is there on that website. And also they can access our Instagram, which is the ES Changemaker, and on any other platform as well.
Yeah, I would definitely direct them to the website because we're very, I think we show intention with the website to offer them the classes that we've helped and the product that they've done. We also have some community projects that we completed over the last year, in particular the Black Lives Matter mural project that the Changemaker Project helped with. And that was gathering pictures of all the different murals in downtown Oakland during the George Floyd protests, and then adding to many of them augmented reality. And this was part of the Future Histories Mellon funded program that Susan Moffett works out of here at Berkeley. And we were able to do tremendous amount of work with them to accomplish this through a course that we taught in the summer. So there's a lot of different collaborations and work that's being done between Ethnic Studies Changemaker and different units on campus in order to, again, amplify some of the work that other places are doing. So the website, I think, is an important place, especially if people are wanting to use the space and then set up appointments or even gain some kind of consultant, like a consultation about a podcast that they might be interested in. We're always here to be able to help them, to be able to do that. At some point, in the near future to even rent out equipment like microphones, recorders, and things of that nature. Right now we can't just because of the logistics, but even something like that because we know people want to go out into the community, record events, or do things like that. So we're wanting to do that as well.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you kind of touched upon my next question, but what does the podcast studio have planned for the future? Any goals in mind or any things that are going to be happening in the next year or so?
One of the things is that my job is to try to make sure that we stay afloat with trying to have the amazing work studies and collective that have been working now for close to a year. So one of the things is to make sure that we're sustainable. The Ethnic Studies Department has helped, especially when it comes to housing it here. And private donors have helped keep us, in a sense, make sure that we still have amazing work studies, and we also work with other units on campus that have now provided us funding for work studies. So one of the things is about trying to make sure that we get people to help out, and we have a lot of allies on campus, which I consider the CTO one of them, and just continue to build that way. We want to make sure that we have, for instance, a field study course where students can gain credit by learning how to or train in podcasting and then help produce their own podcasts. So we want to be able to, again, now enter into the curriculum of the Ethnic Studies Department. We want to, as I mentioned, start working more on the augmented reality. We purchased a HoloLens 2 here last year, and we want to use it in all its capabilities when it comes to building curriculum around ethnic studies. And so we're looking to try to find people that can build applications for it so that we can use it and be able to create projects with it. So there's a lot of different things, especially when it comes to the next step, which is augmented reality that we want to do. And I think the next year is about that, about building and learning and still training. I think just this is a whole different understanding of the kind of training that students learning and training that students are doing on this campus, something that is valuable when it comes to the kind of work that they might be doing, whether it be in academia or outside. Podcasts are now a part of, I think, any workplace, especially that Cal students are going to. And so I think just learning those skills can make you, I think, a valuable team member for any place that you go work. So I think that's also what we want to do, is continue to make sure that students know the kind of work that they can do. But more importantly, this place is a location to tell your stories. And there are plenty of stories on this campus that have not been told. So we want to make sure that they know that they have a space to tell those stories.
Definitely. That concludes about all the questions we have. Do you guys have anything else you would want to add? If not, it was really great to hear about the podcast studio and the impact that it's had on the campus and all the students here. And thank you for your guys' time today.
Thank you. No, thank you.